If I have the courage, I'm going to share something with you at the end of this video. But right now, about my dad, I rarely had the courage to disobey my dad. Rarely. He was fire. My father was fire. He was Aries. And I definitely, even though he had his flaws and his faults, I definitely in my life have measured men against my dad. But then that's what a lot of daughters do, right? So one time when I was 16, 15, 16, I wasn't 17. So at most I was 16. And I was out with my girlfriends. And, I lived in the suburbs and I was out in the city of Buffalo with some friends, and my father wanted me to be home by a certain time or to come home a certain way. I don't remember how I was supposed to get home, but I was not back at the time that I was supposed to be. And I went with my friend, who's still a dear friend now in my advanced age that I am, and my dear friend Patty and her brother, who was my first love. I went with them to the barbershop in Buffalo. I believe it was Floyd's, if I have the name right, from back in the day on Utica, where my dad used to get his haircut back in the day on Utica in Buffalo. And anyway, we were at the barbershop. I was like, let me call my dad and or let me call home and let them know where I am. So my mom answered and I'm like, you know, I'm at the barbershop and, they're going to bring me home after this. And then my dad got on the phone and my dad was like, come home now. Okay. And I'm like, what's the problem? I don't understand. Like they knew my friends who I was out with. And all he would say is, come home now. And I think in the beginning, earlier in the day, we had been to a football game, like a high school football game. So I get home and my father is ballistic. Okay. And so I don't know how barbershops are now, but back in the day, it's not a place where you would want your daughter. Okay. So, but I didn't understand that. I was like, what's the big deal? So anyway, he was so mad. And then he tells me I can't talk on the phone. So, we did not have the cell phones, didn't have these, obviously. We had our home phones, 2, 3 phones throughout the house. And my dad was like, you cannot talk on the phone, period. You're grounded, yada, yada. And I'm so mad. I'm so upset because I don't want to be controlled. Like that is a thing throughout my life because I was protected. I was so protected. But at the same time, things happened to me that shouldn't have happened to me. And I did things to get around the protection. I got my time in, my sneaky time in, right? So anyway, my dad's like, you can't talk on the phone. It's a Saturday. So him and my mom, they go up into the bedroom and they're like watching TV up in the bedroom. I'm down in the den, the family room, and I'm watching, whatever on TV. And I'm just so angry about like, you are not going to control me. Okay. So I decide that I'm going to get on the phone anyway. And so I call my girlfriend Tanya, my best friend who I've known since I was 9. I called Tanya and the thing is, it's a rotary dial phone and this particular phone was loud. So like it was slow and loud. So you dial a number and it would take forever to go around and it was loud. So I was so afraid they were going to hear the me dialing the phone, but they didn't. So I called Tanya and I'm telling her what's going on. And I'm like, I just don't understand, and I'm just going on. And so my parents have a phone in their room. I'm down in the den. And I find out later, my mom is like, my dad was like, I wonder, is Adrienne on that phone? And my mom was like, no, she wouldn't do that. And so he picked up the phone and I'm on the phone. And he says something like, Adrian, get off this phone, something like that. But that's not the point. The point is he flew down the steps. Okay. So he had to go down a flight of steps. Then he had to go through the living room and down like 3 or 4 steps. He like flew down the steps. And I was not a child that was ever like whooped. That did not happen to me. That happened to me like once, 1 or 2 times in my life. My father was so mad that he just like came at me so fast. And then across the room from where I was in was the basement door. I like flew down the basement. I flew down into the basement. So he's like coming at me and I fly down because he's like, I can't believe you're on that phone. And he's just like coming at me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm just going on. And he never touched me. He never touched me, but I was kind of like, I can't believe you're trying to touch me. Can't believe you're trying to, I was just like, just going crazy. And that is the only time I can remember like overtly to my dad's face. There was another time that I could tell you, one other time, but it wasn't as actionable in terms of like his physical reaction as that. And I was just like, oh my God. And I didn't understand what the big deal was until I got older. And like I said, I don't know what barbershops are like now. I mean, it seems like barbershops today, especially barbershops I'm talking about for Black men, is a place where you converse. You might talk about things that are on your mind and your heart and your spirit that women, if they could be a fly on the wall, would find enlightening. But back in the day, it wasn't like that in Buffalo, New York at this particular barbershop. My dad my dad was interesting in that, like I said, he was fire, he wasn't perfect, and at the same time, and strong. He was strong. And at the same time, there were moments that I saw him in vulnerable spaces. I saw him vulnerable. When I say spaces, I mean it might be at home. I would just see him as vulnerable, and then I would feel sensitive to him being vulnerable around me and me seeing him vulnerable and thinking that, oh, that's not something that he would want me to see. But it was never anything that ever came up, after whatever the situation was. And so, like, all these years that have gone by, I feel like he witnessed me and I witnessed him because I am such a balance between my parents. My mom was love, and my mom's flaws were insecurity. I mean, my mom was just a ball of love. And if she wasn't that, she was just feeling insecure about something. And, that is so me. I am so my mom. And my mom, she cared about other people and she was just love. And my dad cared about other people in the way of he wanted you to be aware of what other people were experiencing. He wanted you to be aware of, if you were flippant about something, he would almost like figuratively shake you like what is wrong with you? He wanted you to be aware of what other people were suffering. He used to say, you never take food off another man's table. And he was strong. Both of them were strong in different ways. And so I'm just such a balance of them in different ways. And my dad, though, the older I get, I can see how he saw the purity of me, and that it was something that, he, I wanna say, was concerned about. He was aware of I was gonna experience some hurt in the world because of the purity of my heart. And then I my brother later brought up to me that my grandfather, my dad's dad, was that way in, some ways, and my mother loved my father's father. And I think maybe because they were both Virgos and they both, like, connected maybe in the way that I'm saying. Anyway, my dad one day, I don't know if I've ever shared this, it's a couple of things I wanna share here. One day, he I was about to go to college, and he was I had already lost my virginity, if that's the way we wanna put it. That's the phrase we used, and, I felt like he knew that, but at the same time, he was talking to me as if he didn't know that, and he was concerned about what I might experience out here in the world, you know, as a young woman, when I would have that experience. He was talking about, when I have that experience, and he didn't wanna see me hurt. And now that I'm saying this, like, right here in the moment, maybe he was talking about me being in love. He was just talking about how he didn't wanna see me hurt, and he could foresee me being hurt, and it was hurting him. We were sitting in the living room, and it was just me and him. We're at home, and he was across the living room, and, he's in his recliner, and I'm on the couch, and, he's just telling me how he's, like, concerned about, he didn't wanna see my spirit and my heart hurt. And of course, I'm feeling like, in my thoughts, I'm just, like, nodding and listening, but in my thoughts, I'm like, "What are you talking about? I just don't wanna talk about this right now," And so I'm saying that, and there is something that, I wanna share. I may have shared little parts of this before, but, um, there is this writing that so reminds me of my dad, and it's by my favorite writer, Kahlil Gibran, and it's from the book Jesus, Son of Man, and he's writing about Mary Magdalene encountering Jesus, and what Jesus says to her, it just makes me think about my dad and what he was thinking that I would experience out in the world. And, uh, I'm just I'm just gonna share a little segment from you. So, basically, she is saying how she sees Jesus, and she's floored. She's really floored. I think I might have shared part of this on my, 24-hour episode, but I don't know if I shared any backstory in terms of how it landed or lands for me. And so she sees him in his garden. She sees Jesus in her garden, and she is just trying to get up her courage to speak to him, and then she speaks to him, and he calls her Miriam instead of Mary Magdalene, and she says, "Good morrow to you," and she wants he says, "Good morrow to you, Miriam," and she wants him to come into her house, and he says he doesn't wanna come into her house, like, he's not saying he doesn't want to, he's basically saying, "I'm okay right here." And so then she's saying again, "Won't you come into my house?" And he says, "Am I not already in your house?" And she says, "I don't know what he meant then, but I know now." She says, and I said, "Will you not have wine and bread with me?" And he says, "Yes, Miriam, but not now." And again, she's like, "Not now. I don't know what that means." And I feel like my father could sense and was aware of the depth of my soul and spirit and what I wanted for myself, even though 19, 18 years old, that's nothing I could articulate. But my father could see that. So she says, she doesn't know what he meant. And she says, "Mind you, for mind you, my friend, I was dead. I was a woman who had divorced her soul," which is different for me. That's different from me because I wasn't fully in my soul as I am today at that young age. She says, "I was living apart from this self which you now see. I belong to all men," she said, "and to none." And then she's talking about, we know the story of Mary Magdalene, and she's talking about what she was called. But when his dawn eyes looked into my eyes, all the stars of my night faded away, and I became Miriam, only Miriam, a woman lost to the earth she had known and finding herself in new places. So she became innocent, as we are in the eyes of our fathers. So she says again, "Come into my house and share bread and wine with me." And he says, "Why do you bid me to be your guest?" She again says, "I beg you to come into my house." She's she says he basically looked at her into the depth of her. And so this is what I felt my father could see. Although Jesus is talking to her in a different way. But I felt like my father could see, with women so often when we meet someone, they see surface and they don't see who we truly are. And I felt that was what the message that my father was trying to convey to me. But how could he? How could he? He was really expressing out loud, what he felt. But how do you convey that to an 18 or 19-year-old daughter? And so, but Jesus is talking to Mary Magdalene in this reading I'm sharing, and she is an experienced adult woman. And she says, "I beg you to come into my house." Then he looked at me and she said, "You have many lovers, and yet I alone love you. Other men love themselves in your nearness. I love you in yourself. Other men see a beauty in you that shall fade away sooner than their own years. But I see in you a beauty that shall not fade away. And in the autumn of your days, that beauty shall not be afraid to gaze at itself in the mirror, and it shall not be offended. I alone love the unseen in you." So Jesus says, "I alone love the unseen in you," to Mary Magdalene. And so that's what I'm trying to bring home, that the older I get, as years go on, that that's what my dad was saying. I love the unseen in you. And that's what fathers see in their daughters. That's what fathers see in their daughters. So, oh, he goes on later as she continues to say, come into my house. And then he says, "All men love you for themselves. I love you for yourself." And then she says he walked away. So, uh, that is something that I got this little book, and, if you are a fan of Kahlil Gibran, his readings come in all shapes and sizes. Like, you could find this same book, which is very, uh, small here. You might find this book in, this size. His books come in all shapes and sizes. So, uh, when I think about my dad on this Father's Day, I think about, the complexity of him, because in even when I say that, we always, at least I always think about how women are so complex, and he was a complex person because he was fire and strength, and also he possessed a sensitivity and an awareness that especially men of his generation didn't always show. I didn't even share that I was 21 when he died. I should have shared that in the beginning. So, uh, men of his generation didn't always share or reveal a lot of themselves. And I will say to people sometimes how my dad was, he had a little chauvinist in him. And then at the same time, he raised me to see myself as equal to any person. And he would welcome my mom as an equal. Did not have a perfect marriage by any means, but there were aspects of their marriage where I would think that he would not see my mom as as an equal, when he would have these chauvinistic traits, and then he would. Just very, very, very complex. But, um, sometimes I feel like, wow, losing your dad at a young age, you feel like you really missed out, and I certainly feel that in some ways, but also a big blessing in terms of how God has kept my dad with me. So, just happy Father's Day to all the girl dads out here. Happy Father's Day to all dads, and certainly happy Father's Day to my dad in heaven.